The country club had always smelled like old money and older secrets leather chairs, imported cigars, and the particular brand of cologne worn by men who'd never questioned their place in the world. I'd been coming here for 6 years, ever since I married Derek Hartwell. Derek, whose family name was on half the commercial buildings in downtown Seattle. Derek, who'd swept me off my feet when I was 26 and working as an event coordinator, planning galas for people who spent more on flowers than I made in a month. "You're different," he'd told me on our third date, his hand warm on mine across a table that cost more than my monthly rent. "Not like the trust fund girls I grew up with. You're real, authentic." I'd believed him. God, I'd believed every word. We married at his family's estate on Mercer Island. 300 guests, a dress that cost $40,000, and a honeymoon in the Maldives where the water was so blue it looked artificial. I quit my job at his suggestion. "You don't need to work anymore, sweetheart. Just enjoy being my wife." The first year was intoxicating. Private jets and ski chalets and charity galas where I wore jewelry that required insurance riders. Derek introduced me to his world with pride, showing me off like I was another acquisition, beautiful, perfectly styled, proof of his excellent taste. But somewhere during year 2, something shifted. The credit cards he'd given me, black cards with no spending limits, started coming with commentary. "Another shopping trip?" he'd ask, glancing at the statement. Not angry, just amused. "That's fine. You deserve nice things." The words were generous. But the tone wasn't. It was the voice you'd use with a child who'd spent their allowance on candy. By year 3, I wasn't Emma Hartwell, former event coordinator with a degree in hospitality management and a track record of flawless high-budget events. I was Derek's wife. That was my entire identity. At parties, I was introduced as my wife, Emma, never with context about who I'd been or what I'd done. Just his wife. His beautiful, well-dressed wife who smiled at the right moments and never said anything to challenge the men's conversation. His mother, Patricia Hartwell, had opinions about everything I did. My hair was too modern. My dress choices were trying too hard. I should join the garden club instead of volunteering at the women's shelter where I'd been teaching financial literacy classes once a week. "It's beneath you now," Patricia said over lunch at the club. "You're a Hartwell. You should be at the Symphony Gala Committee, not teaching those women about budgets." Those women. The ones who escaped financially abusive relationships and needed to understand bank accounts and credit scores and how to protect themselves. The women who reminded me uncomfortably of where I could end up if I wasn't careful. I stopped going to the shelter. Derek seemed pleased. By year 4, I'd developed a routine. Morning yoga at the club. Lunch with the other wives where we discussed vacation homes and interior designers. Afternoon shopping or spa treatments. Evening events where I stood beside Derek looking elegant while he networked with developers, investors, city council members. I was perfectly maintained, perfectly dressed, perfectly empty, but I wasn't stupid. That's what they all missed. Just because I'd stopped working didn't mean my brain had atrophied. And something about my situation was beginning to feel dangerous in a way I couldn't quite articulate. So I started paying attention to Derek's business. To the deals he discussed on phone calls he thought I wasn't listening to. To the papers he left scattered on his home office desk. Hartwell Development was expanding aggressively. Derek and his father, Charles, were leveraging everything, taking out massive loans against existing properties to fund new developments. The strategy was risky but potentially lucrative. If the project succeeded, the family fortune would multiply. If they failed, I started spending less of Derek's money and saving the cash back from my shopping trips. I opened a bank account at a different bank under my maiden name, Emma Foster, using my parents' address. I deposited every dollar I could quietly accumulate. 200 here, 500 there. Money Derek would never miss from his millions. I also started documenting things. Not because I was planning anything specific. Just because some instinct told me to pay attention. The credit card statements I wasn't supposed to see. The late-night phone calls where Derek sounded stressed. The investment documents he'd asked me to sign for tax purposes without explaining what they actually said. I photographed everything. Stored it all in a cloud account Derek didn't know existed. "You're lucky you don't have to worry about this stuff," Derek said one evening, seeing me glance at paperwork spread across the dining table. "Business is complicated. Just focus on looking beautiful. That's what you're good at." I smiled and nodded. Photographed the papers after he went to bed. By year 5, my secret account had grown to $47,000. Not much by Hartwell standards, but it was mine, money I'd accumulated without Derek's knowledge or permission. It made me feel less trapped. I also started noticing patterns in Derek's behavior. The projects he was most excited about were the riskiest ones. The investors he brought in were sometimes questionable. And increasingly, I saw my name on documents I didn't remember signing. Did I sign this? I asked once, looking at a loan application bearing my signature. Probably, Derek said dismissively. You signed so many things for the accountants. Don't worry about it, but I did worry because that wasn't my signature. It was close but not quite right. Someone had forged it. I confronted Derek carefully. I don't remember signing that application for the Bellevue property loan. He barely looked up from his phone. Emma, you sign whatever the accountants put in front of you. Does it really matter? We're married. It's all our money anyway. Except it wasn't all our money. It was his family's money, and I was just the decorative wife whose name could be useful on loan applications to spread risk around. I took photos of every forged signature I found. There were 17 documents over 2 years. That's when I hired Patricia Kim, not as a divorce attorney, not yet, but as a financial consultant to help me understand my assets for estate planning purposes. I paid her retainer $10,000 from my secret account. Patricia was brilliant. Within 3 weeks, she'd compiled a report that made my blood run cold. Derek and his father had been using my identity to secure loans I'd never agreed to. They'd opened lines of credit in my name. They'd listed me as a co-borrower on mortgages for properties I'd never seen. The total exposure was over $12 million. If their developments fail, you're personally liable for this debt, Patricia explained. They've systematically spread risk onto you without your knowledge or consent. This is identity theft. It's fraud. Can we prove I didn't consent? I asked. With the forged signatures? Absolutely. I've already had 2 handwriting experts analyze them. They'll testify these aren't your signatures. I sat in her office processing this information. Derek hadn't just dismissed me as incompetent. He'd actively weaponized my trust, using my name and identity to shield his family's risky investments. What are my options? I asked. Patricia smiled. Several. But first, you need to secure your position. Open separate accounts. Document everything. And most importantly, get a full forensic accounting of all marital assets before he knows you're looking. I hired David Ramos, the forensic accountant Patricia recommended. Over the next 2 months, working entirely in secret, David compiled a comprehensive picture of the Hartwell development empire. What he found was terrifying. The company was over-leveraged to an insane degree. They borrowed against nearly every property they owned to fund new developments. If even 2 of their current projects failed, the whole empire could collapse like dominoes. And my name was on documents throughout the structure: co-signer on loans, guarantor on lines of credit, joint owner on properties I'd never even visited. Your husband and father-in-law have been using you as a human shield, David said bluntly. If this goes south, they can claim you were a full partner in the business decisions. You'll be liable for millions in debt. Can I protect myself? I asked. Yes, but you need to move fast. Their biggest development, the waterfront project, is running into permitting issues. If that fails, it triggers default clauses on several loans. We're talking about a potential cascade effect that could happen in weeks, not months. I spent the next month preparing. Patricia filed preliminary divorce paperwork, but didn't serve it yet. David helped me legally separate my finances, opening accounts, transferring my personal assets, creating legal distance between myself and Hartwell Development. I also did something Derek would never expect. I started day trading again. Back in college, before I'd met Derek, I'd been fascinated by the stock market. I'd taken investment classes as electives, traded in simulation accounts, even managed to turn $5,000 into $8,000 during my senior year. After I married Derek, I'd stopped. He'd laughed when he saw me watching CNBC, telling me it was cute that I was interested in his world. Now, with my secret account of $47,000, I started trading again. Small positions at first, building confidence. I focused on what I knew: real estate investment trusts, construction companies, building supply manufacturers. I'd been listening to Derek's business conversations for 6 years. I understood the sector better than he realized. Within 3 months, I'd turned $47,000 into $93,000. My strategy was working. I reinvested aggressively, trading around a core position in carefully selected stocks. By month 6, my account had crossed $200,000. Derek had no idea he's financially illiterate. Wife was systematically building wealth while he leveraged millions in risky developments. The final piece came from an unexpected source: Derek's former secretary, Margaret. Margaret had worked for Hartwell Development for 40 years before retiring the previous year. She'd been cold to me throughout my marriage, one of those women who'd been fiercely loyal to Derek as first wife and saw me as an interloper. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon. "Mrs. Hartwell, I think you should know something." We met at a coffee shop far from the Hartwells' usual territory. Margaret was 73, silver-haired, and furious. "I worked for Charles Hartwell for 40 years, she said without preamble. "I kept my mouth shut about a lot of things. But what they're doing to you is unconscionable." She slid a folder across the table. "These are documents from before you married Derek. His first marriage ended because he and Charles used his first wife's identity the same way they reusing yours. She divorced him, threatened legal action, and they settled for $3 million to keep it quiet." I stared at the papers. Derek had been married before. I knew that. He'd told me it had been a brief, youthful mistake. He'd never mentioned that it ended over financial fraud. "They have a pattern," Margaret continued. "They find women who trust them, marry them, use their identities to spread financial risk, then discard them when it becomes inconvenient. Derek's first wife, Rebecca, barely escaped before a project collapsed and would have left her bankrupt." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I have a daughter your age," Margaret said simply. "And because I'm tired of watching the Hartwell men destroy women while facing no consequences." "You seem smart." "Get out before they destroy you too." The folder contained everything: the divorce settlement, the documents showing the same pattern of forged signatures, even internal memos where Charles and Derek discussed Rebecca as a useful shield for liability. I was the second wife they'd used this way. And if I didn't act, I'd end up like Rebecca, forced to settle quietly to avoid bankruptcy, dismissed and discarded. That night, I finalized my plan with Patricia. The annual country club gala was in 2 weeks. The event everyone in Seattle's real estate elite attended. The perfect public stage. I spent those 2 weeks trading more aggressively. My account crossed 300,000. I also worked with Patricia to finalize every legal document we'd need: divorce papers, fraud reports for the FBI and SEC, criminal complaints for identity theft, everything documented, evidence-backed, ready to file. The gala was held on a Saturday evening in May. The country club's ballroom was decorated with $10,000 worth of flowers. 500 guests in formal wear, drinking champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's car payments. I wore a red dress. Derek liked me in pastels, soft, feminine, unthreatening. I chose red deliberately. Bold, noticeable, done with being invisible. Derek was in his element, networking with city developers and investment bankers. I stood beside him as I had hundreds of times before, smiling at the right moments, decorative and silent. His business partner, Thomas Brennan, approached with his wife. They were discussing the waterfront development, the massive project that was the cornerstone of Hartwell Development's future. "Permitting is taking longer than expected," Thomas said, concerned. "We're burning through capital on holding costs." "It'll work out," Derek said confidently. "It always does. Worst case, we've got backup collateral." He meant me. I was the backup collateral. My name on all those loans. "Emma doesn't worry about this stuff," Derek continued, patting my shoulder like I was a child. "She's got better things to do than understand construction permits and municipal codes." Thomas's wife, Jennifer, gave me a sympathetic look. She understood what it was like to be decorative. That's when Derek's father, Charles, joined the group with several other developers. The conversation turned to a recent news story about a development firm that had collapsed, leaving investors bankrupt. "The wife got destroyed in that mess," one of the men said. "She'd co-signed everything. Lost her house, her savings, everything." "That's why you keep business and personal separate," another man said, glancing meaningfully at his own wife. "Unless you need the personal names for loan applications," Derek said, and several men laughed knowingly. Charles raised his glass. "To understanding wives who support their husbands' ambitions." They all drank. Derek was smiling, enjoying his father's approval. I felt something crystallize inside me. This wasn't just dismissal. This was active exploitation, discussed openly, treated as smart business strategy. Emma understands her role, Derek said, his arm around my waist. She looks beautiful, manages the household, and leaves the complicated financial stuff to me. Perfect division of labor. Lucky you, Thomas said. Jenny here wants to understand our portfolio. He said it like it was amusing, his wife wanting basic information about their finances. Jennifer's expression tightened, but she said nothing. Emma knows better, Derek continued. Without my money, she'd be nobody again. Some event coordinator making $40,000 a year. She wouldn't last a week without my credit cards. The group laughed. Appreciative chuckles from men who saw their wives the same way expensive accessories who needed managing. Something in me snapped. Not explosively. Quietly, like a lock opening, I set down my champagne glass with precise care. The clink of crystal on marble was audible in the conversation's pause. "Excuse me," I said calmly. Derek barely glanced at me. "Where are you going?" "Out," I said simply. I walked through the ballroom with perfect posture, past 500 people in formal wear, out the main entrance, and down the steps where valets were parking cars worth more than houses. My phone was already buzzing, Derek calling. I silenced it. I took a cab to the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, where I'd booked a suite 3 days earlier. I'd moved my essential belongings there over the past week: clothes, documents, laptop, everything that mattered. The penthouse Derek had bought was just a building. This hotel room was freedom. By the time I reached the suite, I had 23 missed calls. Derek, Charles, Patricia Hartwell. Even Thomas Brennan's wife, Jennifer, checking if I was okay. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I opened my laptop and reviewed everything one final time. Patricia Kim had prepared the documents perfectly. David Ramos had compiled ironclad evidence. Margaret's folder provided historical pattern evidence. At 11:47 p.m., I sent 3 emails. The first was to Patricia Kim. Execute everything. File all documents first thing Monday morning. The second was to David Ramos. Release the forensic accounting to authorities as discussed. The third was to my parents in Portland. I'm leaving Derek. I'm safe. I'll explain everything soon. I love you. Then I turned off my phone and slept better than I had in years. Monday morning at 7 a.m., several things happened simultaneously. Patricia Kim filed divorce papers in King County Superior Court. The filing included fraud allegations, identity theft charges, and evidence of forged signatures on over $12 million in loans. David Ramos submitted his forensic accounting report to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and the DIG, documenting the systematic use of my identity without consent. Patricia also executed the legal separation of assets we prepared. Every account, every asset that was purely in my name, including the $300,000 trading account Derek didn't know existed, was legally protected from any claims related to Hartwell Development debts. And most importantly, Patricia filed a legal notice with every bank and creditor where my name appeared on Hartwell Development documents. The notice stated that my signatures had been forged, that I was disputing all liability, and that any attempt to collect from me would be met with fraud charges. By 7:45 a.m., Derek had received notification. According to Patricia's sources, he'd called Charles in a panic. By 8:30 a.m., their attorneys were frantically calling Patricia. By 9 a.m., Derek showed up at the Fairmont. I was having breakfast in the hotel restaurant when the front desk called up to warn me. "Mrs. Hartwell, your husband is in the lobby demanding to see you. Security is prepared to escort him out if you'd like." "Give me 5 minutes," I said. "I'll come down." Derek was pacing the lobby, his tie slightly crooked, the first sign I'd ever seen of him being less than perfectly composed. When he saw me, he rushed over. "Emma, what the hell is this?" He was holding papers, the divorce filing. "Fraud? Identity theft? Have you lost your mind?" "Let's talk outside," I said calmly. I didn't want a scene in the hotel lobby. We walked to a quiet corner of the lobby. Derek was reading through the filing, his face growing paler with each page. "This is insane," he said. "These are just standard business documents. You signed them. You're a partner in the business. Show me one document I actually signed," I said quietly. He stared at me. "Not one you forged my signature on," I continued. "One where I actually signed, understood what I was signing, and consented to be liable for millions in debt." Show me one. You were there when the accountants. No. Derek, I was there when you told me to sign papers for tax purposes without explaining they were loan guarantees. I was there when you forged my signature on documents I never saw. I was there when you systematically used my identity to shield your family's risky investments. That's not what happened, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I have handwriting experts who will testify those aren't my signatures. I have forensic evidence showing I never consented. And I have Margaret's folder. He went completely still. Margaret? Your father's former secretary. 40 years of loyalty, and she couldn't stomach watching you do to me what you did to Rebecca. Derek's face lost all color. You talked to Rebecca? No, but I have all the documents from your first divorce. The settlement you paid her to keep quiet about the fraud. The same pattern you repeated with me. He sat down heavily on a lobby sofa. Emma, please. This will destroy everything. My father's company, my career, our life, your life, I corrected, your company. I was never actually a partner. I was a liability shield you married. That's not true, he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. You told a room full of people that without your money I'd be nobody, that I wouldn't last a week without your credit cards. I leaned forward. Let me show you how wrong you were. His phone rang, then rang again. He glanced at it, his father, his attorney, his business partner, all calling urgently. What did you do? He asked, his voice small. I protected myself, I said simply. Everything I did was completely legal. I disputed fraudulent use of my identity. I documented crimes you committed. I separated my finances from yours before your over-leveraged empire collapses. It's not going to collapse, he said desperately. The waterfront project will work out. We'll get the permits. We'll refinance. This is just a temporary cash flow issue. Derek, I said gently. Your company is leveraged at 4-1. You've borrowed against nearly everything you own to fund developments that are hitting delays. If even 2 projects fail, the whole structure collapses. And now you can't use me as a shield when it does. His phone rang again. This time he answered. I could hear his father's voice through the speaker, angry, panicked, demanding to know what was happening. Derek looked at me as he spoke to his father. She knows everything. About the loans, the signatures, Rebecca. Everything. I stood up. Sign the divorce papers, Derek. Accept a fair settlement. Move on. That's your best option. Fair settlement? He repeated hollowly. Emma, if you push this, if you pursue the fraud charges, the FBI investigation, it'll destroy the company. My father will lose everything. Our family name will survive, I interrupted. Your father is wealthy enough to weather this. You'll both be fine. But you'll do it without using me as a shield. I walked away, leaving him in the hotel lobby with his phone ringing and his world collapsing. The next week moved with brutal efficiency. The Seattle Times ran a story. Prominent developer accused of identity theft in divorce filing. The article detailed the allegations without naming me specifically, but everyone in Seattle's elite circles knew exactly who it was about. Hartwell Development's investors started asking questions. When you're leveraged as heavily as they were, investor confidence is everything. Questions lead to concern. Concern leads to withdrawals. By Wednesday, 3 major investors had pulled their capital, representing over $40 million. The company was suddenly in a severe cash crunch. Derek's partnership promotion, he was supposed to become a named partner in Hartwell. Development that month was quietly postponed. Charles couldn't elevate Derek while he was facing potential criminal charges. By Friday, the FBI had opened a formal investigation into the identity theft allegations. They interviewed me for 4 hours. I provided every document, every piece of evidence, everything David Ramos and Patricia Kim had compiled. The agent handling the case, Special Agent Rodriguez, was thorough and professional. This is substantial, she said, after reviewing everything. Clear pattern of identity theft spanning multiple years. Forged signatures on federal loan documents. This is serious federal fraud. What happens now? I asked. We continue investigating. Interview witnesses, subpoena documents, build a case. If everything you've shown me holds up, and I have no reason to think it won't, we'll be filing charges within 6 months. I nodded. This was real. Derek was going to face actual consequences. Meanwhile, my trading account had crossed $500,000. The market volatility from rising interest rates had created opportunities, and I'd been positioning carefully. While Derek's over-leveraged real estate empire was crumbling, I was systematically building wealth. The irony wasn't lost on me. Derek tried to see me multiple times that week. He showed up at the hotel. He called from different numbers when I blocked him. He sent his mother, Patricia, to try to talk sense into me. Patricia Hartwell arrived at the Fairmont on Saturday afternoon, dressed in Chanel and fury. "You're destroying this family," she said without preamble when I agreed to meet her in the lobby. "Over what? A misunderstanding about some paperwork?" "This is vindictive. Your son committed identity theft," I said calmly. "That's not a misunderstanding. That's how business works," Patricia snapped. "Spouses are partners. Assets are shared. You benefited from that money. You lived in luxury because of the Hartwell name." "I lived in luxury while being systematically defrauded," I corrected. "There's a difference." "You ungrateful." She stopped herself, visibly controlling her anger. "Emma, be reasonable. Drop these ridiculous charges. We'll give you a generous settlement, $2 million. You walk away, sign an NDA, and this all goes away." "No," I said simply. $3 million, Patricia countered immediately. "That's more than you'd ever make on your own. More than you deserve, frankly, for 6 years of marriage." I almost laughed. She still didn't understand. "This wasn't about money." "I don't want your family's money," I said. "I want accountability." Derek committed crimes. He used my identity without consent. He exposed me to millions in debt to protect himself. That's not something you can buy your way out of with a settlement. "You'll regret this," Patricia said coldly. "The Hartwells have connections throughout this city. You think you can just embarrass us and walk away? We'll make sure you never work in Seattle again." "I'm not planning to work for anyone in Seattle," I replied. "I'm going to work for myself." She stood, gathering her Hermes bag. "You were nothing before, Derek. You'll be nothing again." "We'll see," I said. She left. I ordered another coffee and returned to my laptop, where I was researching commercial real estate investment trusts. If the Hartwells' empire was going to collapse, there would be distressed properties available. Opportunities for someone who understood the market and had capital to deploy. 2 weeks after I walked out of the country club, Derek's partnership promotion was formally denied. The announcement was carefully worded, postponed pending resolution of personal matters, but everyone understood. He was being distanced from the family business until the legal issues resolved. His business partner, Thomas Brennan, called me. We'd never spoken directly, but he had my number. "Mrs. Hartwell, I want you to know I had no knowledge of what Derek and Charles were doing with your identity," he said immediately. "I've looked into the documents." "It's unconscionable." "Thank you," I said, surprised. "I'm withdrawing from Hartwell Development," he continued. "Taking my capital and my projects and stepping away. I can't be associated with this. I wanted you to know that not everyone in that world thinks what they did was acceptable. I appreciate that. Thomas, Jennifer, my wife, she's been going through our financial documents now, making sure her name isn't on anything she didn't consent to. You woke her up to the possibility that she should be paying attention." After he hung up, I sat thinking about Jennifer. About all the wives at the country club who stood beside their successful husbands, decorative and dismissed, never quite sure if they were partners or props. I wrote an email to Jennifer offering to share the names of Patricia Kim and David Ramos. If she wanted to understand her finances, she should have help from the same professionals who'd helped me. She wrote back within an hour. "Thank you." I had no idea how much I didn't know. By week 3, Hartwell Development was in serious trouble. The waterfront project had hit additional permitting delays. 2 other projects were over budget. And with Thomas Brennan's departure and investor withdrawals, they'd lost over $70 million in capital. Charles Hartwell held an emergency board meeting. According to Patricia Kim's sources, it was contentious. Charles wanted to mortgage additional properties to raise capital. Other board members were resistant. They were already over-leveraged. Derek was barely functioning. Reports from mutual acquaintances described him as devastated, overwhelmed, not himself. He'd lost 15 pounds. He wasn't sleeping. He'd started drinking heavily. His mother blamed me for destroying her son. I felt no satisfaction in his suffering. Just a quiet recognition that consequences had finally arrived for someone who'd believed himself untouchable. I focused on building my future. My trading account crossed $700,000. I'd begun meeting with commercial real estate brokers, quietly investigating distressed properties that might become available if Hartwell Development failed. I also started Phoenix Capital Management, an LLC that would allow me to manage investments professionally. I registered it, opened business accounts, began building the infrastructure for an actual fund. Margaret, Derek's father's former secretary, called me again. "I wanted you to know that I spoke to the FBI," she said. Gave them copies of all the documents I'd kept from Derek's first divorce. "They're building a very strong case." "Thank you, Margaret," I said. "Why did you keep those documents?" "Because I knew," she said quietly. "I knew what Charles and Derek were doing was wrong. I kept evidence just in case. Just in case someone someday would actually hold them accountable. I'm glad it's you." The divorce moved forward with surprising speed. Derek didn't contest most of the terms. He couldn't, not with the fraud evidence. His attorneys advised him that fighting would only make things worse. The settlement gave me $1.8 million, about 60% of the non-Hartwell Development assets. The house, the cars, the country club membership, I wanted none of it. Just cash and complete legal separation from any Hartwell business obligations. Patricia Kim negotiated brilliantly. "You're entitled to walk away completely clean, with no liability for any of their debts," she explained. "And the settlement amount is based on what you would have been entitled to in a normal divorce, before accounting for the fraud damages. You could push for more." "I don't want more," I said. "I want out." The divorce was finalized 4 months after I walked out of the country club. Derek signed without fanfare. I signed in Patricia's office, then went to lunch with my parents who'd driven up from Portland. "I'm proud of you," my father said over lunch. "Not just for leaving, but for protecting yourself so thoroughly. You were smart about this." "Mom taught me to pay attention to money," I said, smiling at my mother. "I taught you to be independent," she replied. "You taught yourself everything else." The FBI filed charges against Derek 3 months later. Identity theft, wire fraud, and falsifying loan documents. Federal charges with a potential sentence of 5 to 8 years. Charles Hartwell was charged as well conspiracy to commit fraud. The investigation had uncovered that he'd been the architect of the strategy to use wives as liability shields. The Seattle business community reacted with shock and schadenfreude. The Hartwells had been untouchable for decades. Seeing them face actual legal consequences was unprecedented. Derek pleaded guilty as part of a negotiation. 5 years in federal prison, eligible for release after 40 months with good behavior. His securities licenses were permanently revoked. He would never work in real estate development again. Charles pleaded guilty to reduced charges, 18 months in a minimum security facility and 3 years probation. Patricia Hartwell tried to hold her head high through the scandal, but the family's social position had collapsed. They were expelled from the country club. Invitations stopped arriving. The Hartwell name became associated with fraud rather than success. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing. I was too busy building my future. Phoenix Capital Management had grown significantly. I raised capital from several investors who heard about my track record, turning less than $50,000 into over $1 million through disciplined trading in 4 years. My fund now managed $12 million. I'd also used my divorce settlement strategically. I purchased 3 distressed properties from Hartwell. Development S liquidation commercial buildings they'd been forced to sell to raise cash. I bought them at 30 cents on the dollar and immediately found new tenants. Within a year, those properties had appreciated significantly. My net worth crossed $3 million. I hired Jennifer Brennan Thomas's wife as my first employee. She had an MBA she'd never used, having quit her career to be a supportive wife. She was brilliant, meticulous, and motivated. I spent 10 years thinking I was too stupid to understand our finances. Jennifer told me over coffee. Thomas never said it outright, but it was implied. After you left Derek, I started asking questions. I discovered I wasn't stupid. I'd been deliberately kept ignorant. "You're not alone," I said. "That's why I want to build something different." Phoenix Capital became known for 2 things: exceptional returns and hiring talented women who'd been overlooked by traditional finance. We created a culture where competence mattered more than confidence, where asking questions was encouraged, where financial literacy was taught rather than gatekept. Within 2 years, we managed $40 million in assets. Within 3 years, we'd crossed 100 million. I was profiled in Seattle Magazine. From country club wife to investment manager, how Emma Foster built a $100 million fund. The article detailed my journey carefully, focusing on my investment strategy rather than the divorce drama. But everyone knew the backstory. I'd gone from being dismissed as financially illiterate to running a successful fund. Derek was released after 42 months. I heard through mutual connections that he was working in his uncle's property management company. Oh, small operation managing apartment buildings. Nothing glamorous. Nothing like the empire he'd been building. He tried to reach out once, through a mutual acquaintance, asking if I'd meet with him. I declined politely. There was nothing left to say. Charles Hartwell served his full 18 months and emerged diminished. The family business had been sold to cover debts and legal fees. The Hartwell name no longer dominated Seattle real estate. It was just another family that had once been prominent. Patricia Hartwell moved to Arizona. I heard she still blamed me for destroying her family, never quite understanding that her family had destroyed themselves. 5 years after I walked out of that country club, Phoenix Capital Management crossed $300 million in assets under management. We'd generated cumulative returns of 278%. We'd launched the careers of 19 women in finance. I also established the Phoenix Foundation, a nonprofit providing financial education to women escaping abusive relationships. Everything I'd learned about protecting myself, I could teach. Every mistake I'd avoided, I could help others avoid. The foundation partnered with women's shelters throughout Washington state, offering classes on financial literacy, credit protection, and economic independence. The same classes I'd taught before Derek convinced me to quit. One woman wrote to me after taking our course, "My husband told me I was too stupid to understand money. After your class, I realized I understood it fine. He'd just been hiding it from me." I filed for divorce, checked my credit report, and discovered he'd opened credit cards in my name. Without your foundation, I would never have known to look. Thank you for teaching me to protect myself. That letter meant more than any Wall Street Journal profile. I'm 35 now. Phoenix Capital Management is successful by any measure: solid returns, growing assets, an excellent team. But the real victory isn't the money or the business. It's the independence to define myself. I'm not Derek Hartwell's wife. I'm not the event coordinator who married well. I'm Emma Foster, founder and CEO of a successful investment firm, helping other women achieve the same financial independence I fought for. Sometimes I think about that night at the country club. Derek laughing as he told everyone I wouldn't last a week without his credit cards. His father toasting understanding wives who support their husbands' ambitions. All those men treating their wives as decorative shields for their financial risk. Derek thought he'd put me in my place. He'd reminded everyone that I was nothing without his money, that I was dependent, that I existed only as an extension of him. He had no idea he'd just freed me, because I wasn't nothing without his money. I'd been systematically building competence in secret while he dismissed me as decorative. I'd been documenting his fraud while he assumed I was too stupid to understand. I'd been preparing my exit while he leveraged my identity without consent. The woman he described, helpless, financially illiterate, dependent, never actually existed. She was a fiction he created to make himself feel superior. The real me was always competent. I just needed him to push me far enough that I stopped pretending otherwise. 7 years later, I run a $300 million fund. Derek works in property management, his career destroyed by his own arrogance and fraud. The Hartwell empire collapsed under the weight of its own over-leveraged greed. I didn't destroy them. I didn't have to. I just stopped being their shield and let the consequences they'd been hiding behind me finally arrive. That's the thing about systematically dismissing someone. You assume they're not paying attention. You assume they're not capable. You assume you'll always be in control. And then one day, they set down their champagne glass and walk out. And you realize too late that the person you dismissed was actually the most dangerous person in the room: patient, strategic, and utterly done being underestimated. Every time someone tells their spouse they're too stupid to understand finance, every time a partner dismisses questions about money as complicated business stuff, every time someone uses their spouse's identity without consent, they risk creating another Phoenix. And we always rise.